Hey, you guys, happy Friday and happy Fridays with Fidelman. I'm Cheryl Fidelman, the Conscious Codependence Coach. And today's topic on Fridays with Fidelman is codependence and arrested development. I have a little bit of a different background right now because there's a ton of construction going on outside. So I'm just like hunched over in my corner at my desk with my earbuds on, hoping there isn't too much outside noise interference, and I apologize in advance if there is. So codependence and arrested development. So I'm going to talk about this from a few different angles. So if there's any area of your life where you feel like your development has been stunted, right? Like there's some trigger happens and you're 12 years old again, or you're 10 years old, or you're 6 years old, or maybe it's not even a trigger. Maybe it's the entirety of the time you're with a particular person, like you're with your partner, and you feel like 90% of the time you're a younger version of yourself because of fear, or because of the want to be wanted, or because you're trying to gain validation, or you're acquiescing, or you feel dominated, or so many reasons why we are in a younger version of ourselves with certain people, intimate relationship, boss, family member, or you may or may not be as extreme as I was. I mean, I think I was in arrested development for most categories of my life until I was like in my 30s or mid 30s. It just was not move. I just didn't feel like I was moving into adult. For many reasons, and also for those of you out there, myself included, who feel like you were your one or more of your parents or guardians had arrested development, like you were raised by an adult child, and what that triggers and causes in your identity currently as an adult. So, all right, I'm going to cover all that. Thanks again for watching, and please like or subscribe, comment, all the sort of stock phrases and YouTube requests that are important. All right, codependence and arrested development. Here we go. Codependence and arrested development. Okay, I'm going to try to get as much in as I can here. I have the daylight is going out, so I'm sorry that this is a little bit dim. I don't have my regular lighting set up today. So, okay, codependence and arrested development. There's so many things that I want to say about this. I'm going to start with the illusion of arrested development. I mean, one can say that it's all of this unhealed trauma and being stunted in our growth and our codependence. A lot of it is mostly illusion. And so for those of us who feel like we were raised by children, by one or more of our parents who they themselves had arrested development, this illusion that I'm talking about is, like, I'll use myself as an example. I feel like my mom was like 6 years old. I mean, she was a 40-year-old 6-year-old, and that I feel like I raised her. I feel like I legit raised my mom. And, oh, this looks brighter. Oh, just raised the brightness on my computer. Didn't even think of that. Okay. So I did a lot of caretaking for her, helping her with decisions, trying to bring her down from her rages so that she can, like, explaining reality to her, taking care of her when she wasn't feeling good. And so the illusion that I'm pointing to is I might have been more of an adult when I was a child, but my growth and development was arrested because I took that behavior into my adulthood, being the caretaker in my intimate relationships, trying to explain things to them, like explain my point of view and get them to see that I'm right, and get them to see that I know better than them, and get them to see that I know the way and I'm going to show them the light, and get them to see that they're just like magnifying things. And so the role that I played with my mother, even though it's probably true that as a 6-year-old I knew better than my mother, but as an adult I still played the role of thinking that I knew better and I probably didn't. And on some level, it's true that my mom actually asked me to teach her and take care of her. And she brought her problems to me when I was 6, 7, 8 years old. As an adult, I was dating guys who weren't bringing their problems to me. I just thought they were a problem, and I had to fix and change and explain. And so I played the teacher, which was not asked of me, and it was because I hadn't grown from that level of development when I was a child. So in my work, I call it my traumatic identity. I was still being my traumatic identity, the identity that I developed with my mother. I was still being that in my intimate relationships. This also, did I say this already? I'm not sure. This also goes to my point that I said in my video. I talked about this video that I did a little while ago where I talked about how codependence is regressive. In our codependent moments, in our codependent identity, in our traumatic identity, we are in our own personal regression. And this can happen in just intimate relationships for some people, or just at work, or across the board. Like myself, it was across the board. I didn't feel like I really was an adult in any category of my life until I was like maybe in my mid-30s. I mean, I was still being my mom's caretaker all over life, and taking care of out there, and no energy was coming in here. I wasn't taking care of myself. I didn't allow other people to take care of me. I didn't allow love to come towards me, because when I was a kid, there wasn't any room for any love to come towards me. It was all going out. All the energy was going out towards my mom. So this was ignored by my mom and also by myself. And I had to eventually quit taking care of my mom. You know, I became a teenager, and then I was in my 20s, and then I was in my 30s, and I was still in that dynamic with my mom, where I was still helping her and fixing her and showing her the way. And for the most part, it worked. I mean, the things that I would tell my mom and show her, it worked. But I had to quit for me. I had to quit for my conscious codependence recovery. I had to quit being that person for my mom, which was hard. It wasn't easy, because she depended on me for that. And this is important for a lot of us who experience arrested development, is to look at where are you still being that identity with your parents or your guardians or your siblings, that it's important for you to actually quit being that identity. Even though they may depend on you to be that identity. So they either depend on you to be their fixer or their caretaker, or they depend on you to acquiesce, to just say yes. They depend on you to be selfless. And that's the dynamic of that relationship, depends on you being the particular identity that makes that relationship work. And that could show up in your marriage, or in your intimate relationships with your partner, with your boss, where it seems as if the relationship actually depends on you being in your arrested development state. And this is the big part of change. This is the big piece of conscious codependence recovery. When we become our actual age, in ideally that eventually in every category of our life, but when we become our actual age in a particular category, lots of things start to shift, and the dynamics start to shift. People will, there's all different ways people may get upset. Like, for example, I had to say no to my mom a lot. I had to say no with an open heart. First I said no angrily. I went through my phase of saying no angrily and then no with an open heart. And she didn't like it. It didn't feel good to her. But this is also a big part of conscious codependence recovery, is actually having a boundary, holding the boundary, and then witnessing what that feels like to the other person, and witnessing what it feels like to you. Sitting in what it feels like to you. Because oftentimes as codependents, we go, you know what, I'm not going to grow. I'm not going to change. I'm not going to I'm not going to mature because it just hurts everybody and it's just too painful. And so painful for everybody else and painful for me, because when we put up a boundary, oftentimes we will forget about the boundary or set aside the boundary or change our minds. And it seems like it's because we don't like how other people feel about it, but really it's how we feel about it. We don't like, and this is just the point of view of my work, how I sort of switch the angle of the camera to say that it's not so much how other people feel, but it's how are we going to feel when we think someone's mad at us, or when we think somebody doesn't accept us, or when we think they're going to disconnect from us. How do we feel about that? So oftentimes we will not put up a boundary, we won't change, or we'll put up a boundary and change our mind about the boundary because we don't like how we feel in the company of somebody that we just put up a boundary with. I hope that was clear and it wasn't actually too confusing. And so this is where boundaries are way more for ourselves. Like, I'm going to keep my no, or my boundary with myself is I'm not allowed to acquiesce when I don't want to. That's my boundary with myself. And for a lot of us codependents, we think it's the other person crossing our boundary. But I look at it in my work as we are crossing our own boundary by not holding it. Because they may be saying the same thing and it feels like they're pushing the same button, so they push us to push down our boundary. But it's always us that either holds our boundary or lets go of our boundary. And when we let go of our boundary, we go back to our traumatic identity and we're in our arrested development. And so be interested to know in the comments where, if any, areas of your life do you feel like you're either fully in a younger state, or you just get triggered sometimes into that younger state. And that younger state could be a codependent moment where all of a sudden you're caretaking somebody, or all of a sudden you're blaming somebody else or for how you feel because they're dominant and they're in control of you, like our parents were. So they're in control of you and you're blaming them for shutting you down. You're blaming them for being in control of you. You're blaming them for not hearing you, as opposed to having the experience of not being heard. Having the experience of being able to choose whether you want to be there or not. That everybody else is choosing and creating your experience. So any moment that you're proving yourself, that you're blaming your experience on somebody else, or you're being a caretaker, you don't even want to be a caretaker, or you're taking demands. You're taking demands that you don't really want. Somebody else's point of view is more dominant or more powerful, or you acquiesce to somebody's point of view, or you're walking on eggshells because you were used to walking on eggshells when you were kids, so that you didn't piss off that father or that mother or that stepmother or that guardian that was easily set off. And so now you're in an arrested development state, walking on eggshells, making yourself a smaller version of yourself when there might not be any impending threat, but it's an identity, it's an arrested development. Your nervous system hasn't moved on from that kind of fear. There are a lot of also energetic ties that can keep us in arrested development, right? So money is a big one. Oh, I owe them money, or they help me with money, so I'm not going to speak up, because if I speak up, then maybe they won't give me the money that I need, or there's a friend or family member or partner that they handle the money, and so you're more living in their world because they're the financial provider, and so you set aside a lot of your opinions because you feel like you don't want to mess up that financial situation. Also, I think I'm going to do another video on family myths, because there's so many family myths, like so many family secrets that a lot of families are tippy-toeing around because they don't want certain secrets or certain myths of the family to get out. And so the family's in this like arrested development of, oh, we've been holding on to the secret for 20, 30 years, right? And so the development from who we were when that incident happened hasn't moved. And so a lot of this regression and arrested development happens because we're holding on to secrecy and we're holding on to myths. And a lot of that is holding on to shame. Holding on to shame, potential embarrassment or humiliation, another big thing that creates arrested development. So I may or may not have spoke to your particular experience of arrested development, but if I didn't, hopefully just me, excavating these thoughts and ideas have struck a chord in your mind around something that you notice, like, yeah, there's an area where, I haven't moved in my development, or with this person and particular situation, I regress and I become a younger version of myself. I regress to the caretaker. I regress to being a teacher, or I fall into these mentor teaching moments, or I regress to being silent, or I regress to taking. Also taking, codependence isn't always this, like, doesn't always show up as like meek or quiet or afraid. Sometimes we take because we think we perceive a threat, so we take or we overpower. And that was how we dealt with the powerful energy of our parents. For a lot of us, I had this big time in my household. There was this, like, you screw me, I'm going to screw you kind of a thing. Like, I'm going to give you the energy back that you gave me. And so I think that this is also where codependence and narcissism sort of overlaps and has something in common. Because you may not be threatening me with the intensity that I feel it coming at me, but then I will retaliate with the same intensity that I feel you're providing. And so this kind of retaliation is also common in codependence and in arrested development, because our nervous system is getting triggered to the extent that it got triggered when we were children. Like, that nervous system trigger and fear of that threat was real when we were kids, but we're feeling it to the same extent as adults, and it might not be coming at us to the same extent, but our nervous system is still stuck in that frequency. It's still stuck in sensing fear at the same level than when we were kids, or when that incident or series of incidents happened. And so, I work with a lot of couples who go, you're attacking me, I'm being attacked, you're attacking me. And the other person might be passionate about something, or raising their voice, but the level of energy that's coming and the level of energy that's being received isn't always equal. So anyway, I think I've been talking for a long time. I'll stop here. A couple of announcements. We have our Conscious Codependence class. It's going to be Wednesday the 28th at 3 p.m. Pacific. Registration is below. Also have some Conscious Codependence 1-days if you're wanting a smaller chunk. There were some people interested in the 10-month program, and for some people that seemed like too big of a chunk at this time. If you want a smaller chunk of the work, I have Conscious Codependence 1-days. I also have 2-month group program coming up. All right, thanks again for bringing my work into your world and for listening. Happy healing, happy Friday. Hope you have a great weekend, and life is now.